for that student. And then also we have moved, so you'll get to see a little bit of that. So if the student indicates that they're a concurrent high school student, there's certain things that they see, certain things that they can complete that are particular to that student population. Secondly, we also have moved over to a QR code that we've embedded in a number of publications, because all the students are about the QR codes now. And so you'll see some of those items. So I'm going to turn it over to Larry and Dustin.
Thank you, Michelle. And I've already been introduced, so I'm going to just kind of move on to the next piece. But I guess the big piece that I wanted to introduce the company is we're a software company. And so, we work, you'll see kind of what we've done with Rose State College. And we're going to use that as kind of an example. So even if you're, not looking to switch from what you are, I think a lot of the techniques that we're talking about that we applied at Rose State College would be very valuable across the board. And so the idea is that we wanted to start by just talking about some of the challenges and impact. Michelle did a great job of teeing that up, but we thought we would just kind of bring that up and then just talk about kind of general barriers to improving user experience, and just kind of examples of things that we've seen. And then what were the best practices? And this is where we're going to really go into a lot of depth with what we did with Rose State College, and just kind of describe some of the techniques that were followed to try to improve engagement and that sort of thing. And so, in essence, and Dustin, I'll let you kind of chime in as well, but in essence, you can kind of think of it as, it was an older application built on older technology. So, it looks like something that was state of the art in the 1990s, sort of thing. And there were quite, as Michelle had mentioned, there were a number of challenges, and those challenges caused a lot of the recruiters to fall back pretty significantly on paper-based applications. And that was actually one of the challenges, was re-educating people to stop depending so much on the paper applications. And, the belief was that over a period of time, over a 9-year period of time, enrollment had been going down. And one of the culprits was just the engagement of just how do students actually start engaging with the institution from an application perspective. I mean, Dustin, is there anything else that you think we should add?
Yeah, we would get people who would call and say, because of whatever error they were getting or whatever they couldn't figure out on the application and how to make it work, well, I'm just going to go somewhere else. So it definitely had something to do with, at least it contributed.
Perfect. So, and I think part of it, and this is becoming even more important nowadays. So, so there's a couple of articles that we've pulled out, and part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is we get into a lot of discussions with folks about why is this important? Why is a good user experience important at the front end here? And why should we spend time thinking about it? And, if we were to look at just the last 2 school years, enrollment has declined quite a bit. And if you're a community college, it's gone down. It went down almost 20%, 2020, and 15% 2021. And I have links at the bottom of this slide for where this information came from. But, in essence, that's a pretty big challenge for, that people have been seeing. And so from that perspective, it's one of those things where focusing on that, at least can help with that. But the problem, of course, is how do you get started, right? And so there are a number of things historically that can be barriers just to even get started on doing this. And again, I wanted to talk about this in terms of tips and techniques, things that people can take away as being useful for themselves. And the first one I wanted to talk about is that culture can be a pretty big barrier. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The other is just how many different offerings do you have? How many different types of students are you trying to engage with? The other thing is you might have other systems or processes that are causing these barriers. Compliance can also create barriers in terms of making your admissions user experience more engaging. And then finally, technology. So just in terms of the culture, I kind of like to look at most institutions from what is your admissions process strategy? And really there's kind of two strategies that we've seen. One is I'm an institution, I have way more people applying who are qualified than I actually have resources to instruct them. So my admissions process is more about how do I actually optimize based on those constrained resources? So a lot of it is how do I rank and prioritize and eliminate and go through until you finally have the pool that's best fit. The second is you don't have tons more people who are interested in the institution than you have space for. So your capacity is actually, not constrained based on that. And so then it becomes, are you qualified? And how do I actually engage and get you in? Now, the interesting thing is that in a lot of institutions, it's not necessarily mutually exclusive. So in fact, last week I was talking to an institution in Florida where, for their freshman admissions, they're definitely in the case where they have lots more people applying, but on their online school, they have plenty of capacity. And so the interesting thing is that you start getting into some interesting discussion because the culture kind of drives that. So if most of your folks are coming in and your admissions are looking one way, it can be a challenge to actually say, well, I have an underrepresented group that I want to improve, to increase enrollment for. How do I engage and reach them, and make it easier? And so again, that's just something to keep aware of as you go through this. The next piece, of course, is just how many different types of offerings, because, you may have different items like, I have special programs or I have concurrent. So one of the things that Michelle talked about is concurrent high school and college enrollment. And so each of those offerings have different things that you're looking for in different processes sometimes. So how do you kind of make it so that it's engaging and working from that perspective? We'll also talk a little bit more about some of the other pieces as well, but dependencies on other systems. And we'll show some examples of where the candidate profile actually creates a bad user experience because the other system requires you to collect a bunch of data so that you're actually matching against prior students or things like that. Or maybe your student information system has all sorts of pieces of data that are needed. And so how do I collect it in a way that actually will allow that to be collected for that purpose? And then the other is, what data am I collecting? Obviously the first step is I need to make an admissions decision. So what information is needed to make that decision, to qualify them or that sort of thing? But then you have other processes as well, like do I want to ask for information about financial aid in the application? Do I need to have this data for compliance purposes? So are there some agreements that we want to put in place that we collect at that point? And then, of course, for analytics, so maybe I also want to collect demographic information for institutional research or marketing so that we can talk about, great, how many, how are we reporting against the people who are coming into the school, slicing and dicing it for marketing purposes? So all of these things can add to the complexity of that. Since we're running short of time, I probably will just go through this a little quicker, but we'll talk more about some of the things that, for example, for vaccination status was a big one we talked about. Residency is always an important one as well. So for compliance purposes, how do you gather information for that? And then, of course, technology. So one of the things that Michelle had talked about is QR codes. So if you're going to use a QR code to actually streamline getting in and kind of removing friction, Well, then you need mobile access. So, because the device, you're actually taking a picture or actually using the camera to get the URL, and then you need to get started on a mobile device. But you may have accessibility as something that's important. The other piece is that a lot of solutions don't do real-time integration. So, you might have a day or a week or a month between the time someone starts the application process to where you actually can validate things or to actually give them any feedback, which drives engagement and that sort of thing. So again, I wanted to just kind of describe some of the reasons why there are challenges, just as a starting point, but let's just talk about some examples. So this is a screenshot that I took specifically from Rose State College's application. And before we got started, and you'll notice that there's a bunch of radio buttons where basically you're kind of looking at what type of application is it? Is it an international one? Am I readmitting someone who was already there? International? And you can see that that's one of those things where there's lots of selections and you have to have a lot of text to explain what it means. And if you choose incorrectly, then you got to start all over again. That sort of thing. And so that's what I kind of call a complex selection piece of that. In many circumstances, you may have multiple applications, one for each one of those different categories, which kind of leads to the next one. This is actually an example where you're doing the same thing, but in a different manner. So again, I might have, and in this circumstance, there's 17 different applications. And so how do I help someone pick out from those 17 different applications? And so this kind of has a way that you drill in, and I kind of call it an application library. Now, why do you have to do this? A lot of times it's because you don't have a lot of conditional logic to allow you to actually make the application adjust organically to the data that the person's providing. So you have to have all of these different applications that you've set up and are maintaining and that sort of thing. The third example that I wanted to talk about is no user registration. And this was very similar to what Rose State College had at the beginning, where basically you start by filling out the application. And then at some point, you can save your user profile and save your, the application as it's, in process. And of course, the problem is that it actually introduces a number of challenges, like, for example, if the person's machine runs out of battery while they're right in the middle, or something crashes or that sort of thing, they got to start all over again. And so it causes quite a few abandonment issues if you don't handle that appropriately. And of course, if it happens, you have no way of contacting them later because you haven't actually collected any of their contact information. Of course, the exact opposite is an intrusive registration. So here's an example where someone is asking for, your social security number, your birth date, your preferred name, your address, prior names, legal residency. And so you have to fill all of this out before you can actually start the application and have a kind of a place as a candidate where I can come back in and check status and complete it if it takes multiple sessions. And you'll notice in this example that they know that it's problematic because there's a link that says, why should I provide my SSN? View privacy policy, things like that, because again, it's pretty intrusive from that perspective. And we'll talk about what some of the impacts are and kind of, how we're handling that. Another example is kind of what I call an austere application. And what I mean by it is that the idea is that I want to keep it simple, but I can't provide, but in some ways you kind of need to provide additional information to help them fill out the application. So in this circumstance, of course, the only thing you have available is kind of the label of things. So I have the label of birth date, I have the label of gender. But again, this is saying, okay, well, social security number, I can't just only prompt for social security number. Now I have to kind of explain it. And so what did they do? They basically changed this label so that it has all of this huge amount of text in there. And it creates a number of challenges, again, from an engagement and a user experience perspective. So those are some examples, but let's actually go through and talk about best practices. And I'm going to go through and we're going to start showing the demo relatively shortly as well. So the first piece that I wanted to talk about is the registration process. The idea is that if you can streamline it, if you can make it so that it's just a couple of steps, you go in and you basically do a user registration, now you can communicate with them. You can engage with them immediately, that sort of thing. And if anything goes wrong, at least you have that, right? And so the idea is that let's optimize on that. Now, as we talked about earlier, there are a number of challenges based on dependencies with other systems and things like that. So again, if I have to go in and match a user so I don't get a duplicate user or duplicate application, and I have to do it right here at the very beginning, then it makes it unstreamlined. And so what I wanted to do is just kind of show an example here. So what I'm going to do is, let me resize this so that you can actually see my phone. So I have my phone to the right. Oops. It's running a little slow here. All right, close enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the camera, and you'll notice that the QR code here is it's actually identified that there's a hyperlink, and I can just click directly on this. So one of the things, and this, I'm actually on site today at Rose State College, and this flyer is posted all over the place here at the Student Union and stuff like that, which makes it really easy. If I'm a candidate, I can come in here, I can use the QR code, and at the click of a link, I'm applying. And so let me do this, and I'm gonna just zoom into this screen right here. And again, it's just 3 steps, right? So first is who am I? Second is contact information. And third is basically just create my user profile. So I'm gonna put in the name James Bond, because of course the James Bond movie is coming out this week. So, and his preferred name is not James, it's gonna be 007. And I'm going to put in an email address. So it'll be bond@007.com. And I'm going to send a text. And I'm going to put in a phone number. Go to the next piece. And that all looks good to me. And I'm going to choose my own password. So I'm going to do and now I can click register. And you'll notice that not only did it do the registration, but it also sent me a text. And at the same time, it also sent me an email. So, and that does 2 things for me. Number one, the institution now knows by trying to send the text and trying to send the email that it's a valid email and a valid text, and the send was successful. So now I know how to reach that person. The other is that as a candidate, I also know that and it's more engaging, right? That sort of thing. And so now I can go and start filling out my application right here, right? I can start providing new information, that sort of thing, and go from there. So that was kind of the first piece.
We we also have had people at the counter pull up that text. I got this text. So what do I do now?
Yep, exactly. So, and again, the idea is that by being engaging in that way, number one, you'll notice that we did the registration. It was just a few steps, and we were done, right? So, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping here, and we'll go from there. So that was the first piece. And now all of a sudden at this point, I actually now know I can track, did they do anything after doing the user registration? Maybe I can contact the people who filled out the user registration, but haven't completed their application yet, things like that. The second piece that I wanted to talk about is just the concept of having the application transform based on what the person's filling out. Again, a lot of folks will have multiple applications. I've seen some institutions that have as many as 23 different applications for admissions. And the problem, again, comes down to the fact that the application can't transform. It can't, so I only need certain pieces of data for certain applications and other pieces of data for others. And so instead of actually having it be an intelligent application, I have to create dummy forms for each one. And so the idea here is, and this is one of the things we found, is that people don't always get it right the first time. And so being able to kind of make it transform based on that becomes important. So if I were to go here, and I'm going to go back to this, and I'm going to do it online instead. So I'm going to log in here. And because I saved my password, I can actually just log directly in here. And we can go through and just talk about some of the things that will change based on how someone starts filling out. Probably one of the biggest ones that we talked about, Dustin, right, was residency. How do I figure out residency requirements and have it transform based on that? So for example, instead of having a separate military one, I can go in here and say, maybe I'm currently serving. So if I'm currently serving at this point, let's see, why is it not putting in, asking if I'm serving? Yeah, actually, let's do, so if I go Oklahoma, currently serving. So normally it would show that it's currently serving and I think our development team's been working on something in the middle right now.
Yes, not our production application.
Right. So anyway, the other thing is that if I go over here, for example, to education, you'll notice that, for example, I can say, am I currently attending high school, first time, previously admitted? So again, by picking this, it'll actually adjust the application based on that. So I can say, all right, you know what, I'm currently attending, and I can pick other things based on that. If I can say this is first time or previously admitted, it actually changes what the options are below, that sort of thing. The other thing is if I pick transfer, of course, then I can start providing the transfer information as well.
And then we decided on internationals to go ahead and have it act as though the person was a transfer. Just not requiring the other university or college in case they were not a transfer.
Yep, exactly. So these are the sorts of things that we're trying to do so that, again, I can go in and answer the questions in a way that makes the most sense and provide that information. So the other thing was just capturing the data organically. So, which kind of goes hand in hand with what I was talking about with it transforming. So, for example, one of the things that we will do is instead of collecting social security number, address, phone, all of that right at the very beginning, we will capture that as part of the application itself. So, I can go in and provide the contact information. So, for example, I've got the phone number here. If I wanted to go in and put in my emergency contact. So So M may be in my emergency contact, and I can provide, other pieces of information. Pardon? Oh. So again, and I'm just going to pick just some data to put in here as well. So again, you can see that as I provide some of this information, so under the personal, I can provide the social security number, these other pieces in places where it makes sense. For example, on the US citizenship, that sort of thing, that's where we can determine whether they're international or if they live in an address that's not in the US.
Press pound when finished.
Sandy, I can't get logged into Paycom on the client side. If you call me back, I'd appreciate it. It's Mackie.
Mackie, if you could mute, that would be great. Thank you.
So anyway, so that's where, again, we're gathering this stuff organically. Another example is the residency piece. I highlighted that earlier, but the idea is that when you calculate residency, there's really kind of two rules that are in place here. One is, if you're stationed at an in-state military base, then we basically don't check how long you've been in state, your residency. We just treat you as if you are a resident. If you have a local residency, then there's a check based on how long you've been in. So for example, if I were to go here and put in my home address, and you'll notice that it says Oklahoma, and here it says living in Oklahoma since. So the idea here is that by living here now, I know that you are currently, have a local location. And if I go back 12 months, so if I go back to 2020 and October 7th, so from that perspective, if I fill this out and collect the data this way, the math is actually what determines the residency based on that. And the nice thing is, if for some reason I fill out an application, I want to get readmitted sometime in the future, this date doesn't change, right? So the math calculation will continue to work. So the idea is that, again, we're gathering this data in an organic way that makes sense to the candidate. They're not asking questions that don't make sense.
Our previous application had a very confusing, it was how many months and years have you been here? And the way it was laid out was confusing. So they might actually stick the number of months in the year spot. And then, they say I've been here 4 years, but they're actually putting 4 months, and then they're calling and saying, why am I being charged? As we're all used to, people calling and asking that question, and then just saying, well, I must have made a mistake. And,
yep.
Then we have to ask for the paper to prove.
Yeah. And generally most people know when, they've actually moved to a certain place. And so instead of making them do the math, again, you're making it easier. You're eliminating friction. And so, for us, it's like one of the first questions we always ask, is there a natural way to get this data into the application? What's the most natural way to get residency information? Vaccination requirements was one we talked about quite a bit. So if you have graduated from an in-state school, we can assume that those vaccination requirements, whatever you've done for that, transfer over, so we don't have to go through and do the additional validation at that point. Otherwise, we would need to ask for it. So again, combination of the school, the high school, and the date, graduation date, tells you whether or not you need to ask, additional questions about vaccination. Ethnicity, demographics. We spend a bunch of time talking about that as well, because there was information that really wanted to be collected being an Oklahoma school about, Native American tribes and, mother, father, that sort of thing. So we kind of updated it, the ethnicity based on that, that sort of thing. And again, what do you need it for? Do you need it to make an admissions decision? There are a few things where we want to make sure that, for example, you're basically asserting that you know something. So for example, on the concurrency piece. So for example, if I were to go here, and if I were to switch the education type to concurrent, and I go over here to the review tab, you'll notice that there's a concurrent student agreement that's in here, and I can go read the whole thing and I can agree to it, that sort of thing. And the idea is that that's the most natural way to get that information from the candidate right there at that point. There are other things where we made a different decision. So for example, on the military side, if you're stationed at a local military base, you might need to provide additional information to verify so that it can be audited. Well, that has to be, there's other similar information that needs to be provided later anyway. So it makes sense to ask for it then versus on the application. And so those are some of those things, like where's the most natural place to do that?
And that the concurrent contract that you just showed and the vaccination, we have a form that the student checks off their status. Those two documents, those were pieces of paper additionally that we were collecting that now we are not having to collect.
Yep, exactly. The next thing I want to talk about is just kind of helping people select things. And so we spent a lot of time, because just the way that PeopleSoft and I'm sure other student information systems collect high school information can be very problematic. And so, you have multiple things you're trying to accomplish when you do this. So for example, no registry of schools is perfect. So we actually have we actually pull in the complete list of high schools from the Department of Education each year and include that as the selection. So we know the city, we know the school, we have the addresses, that sort of thing. But a lot of times they may need to type in their own. So how do you do it in a very natural way to do it? So for example, if I were to go here and go back to the education tab, and I want to pick my high school name. So if I pick the high school name here, let's see. So one of the ones that, that we would, that was pretty problematic in the past is a local school is Epic. And so, we had Epic in multiple towns, multiple cities, that sort of thing. And so picking the right one would be really important, that sort of thing. So that's the other thing. So we spent a lot of time trying to simplify this and make sure that you're getting correct data from that perspective. So anyway.
And it is much better. That we've worked on it quite a bit and it works very well.
Yep. Thank you. And then the other thing is just, how do you make it so that it's helpful to folks? Because a lot of times it's important to know, how is this data being used? So, for example, date of completion. What does it mean, date of completion? Well, a lot of times what it is if I'm applying and I haven't graduated yet, but I will be graduate, at the time I'm filling out the application, but I will be graduating before I start college. Then we need to explain what that means, because a lot of times if you don't, they're going to make the wrong selection, provide the wrong date, things like that. Similarly, the high school name, what's the last secondary school you attended? Because that's really all they're worried about from that perspective.
If you see that option, there's a no diploma, and that's what someone who's currently attending high school would tend to pick initially.
Right, right. And by adding that language, then it would be, no, I'm an upcoming graduate. So we kind of, simplify it from that perspective. Real-time validation. So we're running short of time, so I'm going to go through this a little quickly and not necessarily go back to the demo piece. So in this circumstance, we're actually doing a live check of phone numbers as they're entering it. We're doing that real time, so that, I have the person's attention while they're in the system filling out the application. Take advantage of it. Make sure that you collect the data and validate it, not come back later and say, oh, you provided this incorrect information. Now you've got to go and correct it, things like that. And then the other piece is status visibility. And again, I'll just show a little bit of this. So you may not have noticed, but there's this progress bar at the top. So as I complete different parts of the application, so for example, if I go in and put an anticipated graduation date in here, you'll notice the progress bar just went up. You also have much visibility, like, all right, what information are you looking for? Okay, my personal information, contact, address, education, and then just review, and I'm done. You'll also notice that in this circumstance, I can see the list of things that are needed to be provided, and I can actually click and finish that. So if I want to go to birthplace, and birth date, so we'll go back to there. I'm just picking a date at random. So you'll notice that it's completing that. Let me do this address. Now, one of the things that we're adding that we don't have yet, H, is we'll actually identify typos and correct shortcuts and things like that.
They're working on that right now for most common typos or abbreviations.
So you'll
I
notice.
would like to throw in something here, Larry, if I may.
Sure.
Just before we end the call, this is a subscription-based model rather than, so they were the developers. Previously we would contract with somebody to do our application, and then it was like a one and done deal. And then we'd have to contract with them again to do enhancements or changes to the application or even fixes. This is a subscription-based model. So once we went live, we have just continued to make enhancements really almost real time in some instances. Some other fixes or enhancements have taken a little bit of time, but really rather quickly, sometimes same day or less than a week, and then we're able to roll that out. And so it's been a really nice agreement with that subscription-based model where we just pay annually for the application for admission. And it's worked really well for us, because that contracting with somebody and then having to do it again was so cumbersome for us, and I'm sure for others. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I guess the last piece that I wanted to do as well is because again is just kind of show that this is live as well. Because again, providing feedback to the candidate that they have actually submitted and successfully submitted it, real time becomes important, because if you have a week or a day or longer, again, that creates some challenges. So, and Michelle already talked about the continuous process improvement, where we're always looking for ways to improve it, even after go live, and so the idea is that, all right, what's your biggest thing that's causing challenges for your candidates? Okay, well, do we have ways that we can fix that sort of thing? And just to kind of show you why this is important, just wanted to show, so in this year, while they've been live for not quite a year, probably like eight or 9 months, enrollment is increased by 5%, whereas industry-wide, it's gone down 15%. So it's really kind of helped them buck the trend in terms of what's happening with community college enrollment. So I wanted to thank everybody, and I'd love to, I know that we're kind of over time, but if you guys can, if you're in town and you can make it, love to have, talk to you about what you guys are doing or challenges, or answer any questions that you might have. We're having a get together 6 to 8 p.m. in Social Capital in downtown Oklahoma City. There's a QR code to register if you, just so that we can get a count, so we have enough space for the number of people who would be there. So if you want to do that, that would be perfect. In fact, let me do this. I'm going to put this in the chat, just so that, where is that?
And so also while he's working on that, also another important thing is, while we're a PeopleSoft school, this can go across all SIS platforms.
Yes.
So thank you for attending. And I think he's adding the social capital event this evening, if you're able to make it. And don't forget to fill out your surveys, best practices and admissions engagement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.